All right, guys, welcome to today's LinkedIn Live. This is our first ever community session to the public. To those of you that don't know who influencer strategists are, we are a community for the leaders in the creator economy. Please let me know where you're tuning in from. I'm personally Janan, based in Copenhagen. We have Gordon, based in UK, and Jack, based in Amsterdam. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them in the chat. Today, we're going to look into what happens when influencer marketing is not measured on platform vanity metrics that we're so used to talk about, like engagement and likes, but actually model investment that can be justified via business outcome metrics. So we have been for way too long been measuring creators on the wrong premise because either A, we didn't have the proper measurement frameworks and technology in place, or B, we simply potentially didn't measure creator impact on business outcomes with the wrong time frame. To solve that billion-dollar question that many people call it, we have today with me Jack Dougherty, head of influence at Ogilvy Benelux. I guess Ogilvy don't need too much introduction here, but to those of you that don't know Jack, he's in my eyes one of the leading forces in influencer marketing today, and we're extremely privileged to have him on the panel today. And also with me is Gordon Glenister, industry legend, author, my co-founder with 300 plus keynotes and panels and more than 1,000 plus interviews across, the last decade, I would say, Gordon, right?
Something like that, yes.
So, now talking about the past decade, I think influencer marketing has matured dramatically. We know how to manage creators, we know how to make campaigns, we know how to monitor, but one thing that is truly missing is, surprise, surprise, measurement. And when we look at the numbers, it's quite fascinating that, after so long, we still see that the number one challenge for brands is that we simply cannot measure creator performance properly. And there's basically two colliding forces, I would call them. On one side, we see that the investments in influencer marketing is significantly up, especially across specific verticals. Now, this stands for very small text, I know that, but we see that enterprise influencer spend is up year over year with 171%. 72% of CMOs plan to increase marketing budgets, while at the other hand, we see that there is still a significant challenge with measurements. According to McKinsey's latest CMO research, we see that brand is the number one strategic priority. However, and now listen, this is an extremely thought-provoking fact, only 3% of CMOs can actually explain ROI for more than half of their total marketing spend. So before I continue with my stats and research, Gordon, I would like you to take over from here.
Yeah, so I mean, one of the things that really fascinates me is we're now in this era of influencer ROI, and there's some really fascinating stats here, which say that only 22% of marketers really do have the insight measurement insights that they need to position themselves to their CFO. And then also looking at this, which I think is also fascinating, is 62% say they need better tools to be able to do this, because what they're getting is just really not enough. But across a number of different industries, the good thing is that between 49 and 74% rather, of consumers really do have are really trusting influencer insights, and that proves the real value of it. So let's just, Jack, I'm really interested to hear from you now about what you think clients are, what are they asking? What are some of the questions that are asking influencer marketers now?
If only we knew, Gordon. No, I don't know. It's interesting because, influencer spend has gone up. But I think we can all agree that generally spend has gone down, or budgets are incredibly tight. So even though we are being siphoned more money, we're being held to account for what's happening with that money in more ways than we were traditionally. And that trickled through into sort of reporting and sort of performance metrics and taking learnings and starting with insight. So whilst, I guess, spending has gone up into influencer in particular, we're being held to account to it like in a lot more different ways. And sort of agency fee, for example, is taking a hit on that because the hours that we're spending on producing really in-depth and high-quality reports is eating into that spend in itself. So I think the questions that we're being asked have changed significantly from like when I started working in influencer marketing to now. But we're also using our resources better with the data that we're finding through the performance metrics in the first place to have more insightful campaigns. So it's a bit sort of double-ended. In terms of like the questions that we're actually being asked, it's a lot more insight driven. As professionals, we are suggesting, so for it's like we're suggesting more engagement metrics and putting engagement as like a really high priority as a KPI, and we're being asked to justify that in our reports. Like, what does that mean? What can we take from that? What's the learning, and how do we take that into secondary or ongoing campaigns, etc. So whereas before it was metrics or reports in general for influencer was a bit sort of showing off. It was a bit like, we've had this huge impact, look how much reach we've got. We need to demonstrate what that means now. And like, if we're suggesting engagement, what is the learning from that? Is it a growth in sentiment? Is it a brand awareness? Like what are we taking from that? And where do we use that as a starting block for the next campaign? Or where do we pivot? So as much as the asks are getting more intense, we're learning a lot from it ourselves as well, and then sort of doing a better job as a result of that. If that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I mean, and we were talking, weren't we, in the sort of preparation last week about this, because I think sometimes we think that just influencer campaigns are all about just getting that immediate impact from a campaign, but actually it can be a whole lot more, can't it? We can actually find out some trends that are appearing as a result of the reaction from a creator's follower base that could actually create a different direction for the brand. And the other thing I think is really insightful here is the fact that influencer campaigns, you can turn off and turn on the campaign as well when you've got overperforming creators and then others that perhaps are not. It becomes much more agile as a media, doesn't it, as opposed to some of the other forms of media.
Completely. And I think you're right there about being more agile in our approach and having sort of review moments to like review performance of not only the content itself, but particularly like creators or markets or audiences, etc. And I think, this has come almost as a result of influence being quite late to the table. And we are often thought as like an afterthought sometimes, right? It's like if there's a little bit of budget left, then we pull in influencer. But as a discipline, I think we're being taken a lot more seriously. We're at the table or at the beginning of the discussion a lot more now. And because influencers are coming out of like a PR discipline originally, and then sort of going into social and now kind of standing on its own as that bridge between. We are, as a result of that, being taken more seriously. We're involved a lot earlier and have a lot more sort of steer on the campaigns that we have, rather than just sort of having to build something out of what was left. So that, again, has added to this sort of shift in the need for more intricate data and to be able to use that in a more sort of smart way.
Yeah, and it's just what Jan has put up here now, which I think is really fascinating to see that traditionally TV was seen as widespread in terms of awareness, but actually its cost now is considerable versus some of the other media. And I think some of the things that we like to see in our sector is being able to justify where that influencer creator impact is coming as part of the overall media and advertising spend. When we start to drill down on that, I think we're going to start to see lines on the marketing budget that actually say influencer marketing, rather than it be, as you suggest, a sort of an afterthought.
Yeah, and we're seeing that now. That is happening, and I think the bigger brands are kind of setting the precedent for that. Well, from my experience anyway, and from in our agency in particular, we often sort of demonstrate models somewhere and then we craft them elsewhere with varying degrees of whether they're successful or not. But I think this is an interesting reflection here of TV. People are watching TV less. People are on social media more. Like when those growth metrics and when TV, there's a place for TVC still. Absolutely, there is. Above the line marketing definitely works, but it has to be a part of a wider messaging. and a part of a bigger sort of brand mix, let's say. And it definitely has its place as a part of like a full end-to-end delivery or a 360 campaign. It's just less significant than it used to be. And there's more space now for influencer marketing since people are on social, you know?
Yeah. And of course, the other thing that has fascinated me is this reverse engineering where the creator is the forefront of the campaign and they're using their content to be able to be on different channels, including billboards, including, you know, taxi media and all sorts of other areas, which in itself is quite fascinating.
Absolutely. And that's something it's quite new and it's still evolving. We've done a couple of campaigns, one quite recently for Sennheiser actually, where they were launching a new product to a sort of Gen Z audience, which they'd never produced a product for before, right? So they used quite a traditional funnel method. So we implemented influencers throughout that, or creators throughout that whole funnel, and had them within the sort of paid social campaign. We had them creating their own content, either commissioned, which we then used, or as like partnership, traditional sort of influencer content. And we also put that all the way through to like the demonstration videos on Amazon. So you're seeing the same creators, you know, on the paid social, then you're seeing on their feeds or from their content, then, you know, reacting with the brand or, you know, cementing that partnership. And then at your point of purchase, you're seeing that same person then again, sort of demonstrating that actual product. So it's amazing for like a brand to tap into a whole new audience and have that all the way through the funnel. And we saw it was incredibly successful, you know, especially for markets like China and other like developing social markets as well in particular, to sort of see that almost like friendly face take you all the way through the funnel was really effective. And for us, it means that we're able to, you know, craft these quite interesting deals and partnerships with these creators and then go on to use them sort of again and again. And that kind of ambassador approach, which is incredibly popular when used right, it really kind of cements that in, you know?
Yeah, and I think as well, particularly when you're tapping into these creators in very smaller but highly engaged niches, which you can't necessarily get from a widespread television campaign.
Yeah.
And those individuals can, of course, be forefront of a particular niche sector, whether they be in, I don't know, a diverse community, a disabled space, or you know, do you see what I'm saying? It's quite a wider mix. And when brands can tap into these very unique areas, they can get some fantastic levels of performance.
Absolutely. And also sometimes the messaging that you're trying to convey just isn't above the line. It isn't broadcast, you know, it's quite specific, it's quite unique, and it's really developed for a particular type of audience. And that's the beauty of the partnership, isn't it?
Yeah. And so on that, I mean, you touched on it a little bit. You know, is there a certain criteria of measurement that is consistent right the way across the WPP group? I mean, you suggested that we always start with an insight and then you sort of drill down and then answer that and then report on that. But I just wondered whether or not you have a sort of and I'm not expecting you to go into, you know, confidential details, but more broadly, is there a process mapping that you have found to be very successful that has changed over these last few years?
Yeah, absolutely. I think reach in particular, right? Reach is golden, right? We always need to see the reach of where our content and how many eyeballs have seen it. But I think engagement becoming a lot more of a sort of prime metric has really sort of shifted that. And even in our approach to sort of building campaigns and strategies, we take that into account a lot more. And yeah, like mentioning earlier, we start all of our campaigns with an insight, right? So I don't know, 52% of this particular audience has this behavior, and then we use that as an insight to build our campaign on. And then within the reporting, we reflect on whether we were successful to close that gap or to identify that niche and whether we penetrated within it, or, you know, we use that metric there. We also kind of hold that as our own standard sort of midway through flight when we're doing sort of review moments, like we touched on earlier about like a more dynamic approach, like if a particular channel isn't working or is working, or audience or a particular creator, then we use those metrics, or we use that original insight as like a North Star to keep coming back to and like a benchmark for ourselves. And that's not something that we always really did in the past. And I think we are able to justify that in our work through the tools that we have with WPP, right? So that we have the whole WPP Open Suite, which is like an AI integrated set of tools. And that we kind of use that right the way through our whole delivery as well. So, you know, from like the planning, from the strategy, The strategists are using it when they're building the sort of BBIs and the original brand platforms that we hook our campaigns onto. And then we're using it again for review. We're using it again to measure performance. And then we're using it again at the end to pull the data from and find insights within that. And that is a traditional approach, you could say, but there would have been weeks of desk work. Now takes, a couple of hours, and we're able to provide a bit more of a cohesive service, I guess, across like our clients to varying degrees as well, right? So we have like a really wide range of clients, right? From like really big brands right through to like quite hyper localized niche product brands, right? But the process is similar, and we just pick the elements of it which are relevant to that brand or relevant to what we're doing. But it's amazing to have access to sort of like that level of like granular data.
And that's the benefit, of course, of AI, isn't it? It can do stuff. It can do this analysis at scale that would otherwise take a whole bunch of people, which means that you, as a team, can be spent using your time way more effectively. And has that analysis helped win more business as a result of that level of reporting?
Absolutely, I'd say so. I mean, having access to WPP Open is certainly a product stream for us, and our ability to be able to tap into those tools for our clients is certainly a selling point. But just touching on something that you just mentioned then about, taking hours away from desk time, like it's quite easy to rely on these tools and just have or hope that they're going to provide you with the answer. But there's an amount of sense checking that has to take place in it, right? So especially like pulling these insights out of it, sometimes the AI left unattended can just like really fill the gaps with wild assumptions. So we have to be quite delicate with it. But I think as well, they're like learning models, right? So like the more that we're using them, the more that we're training them, and we're seeing that a lot with these agents that we're building as well. And being able to integrate them at sort of different degrees of delivery as well, right? So yeah, it does save you so much time, and it makes everything really cohesive and concise. But there is a real element of like what you're feeding it and like what you're telling it and the prompts, etc. But also like working with agents that you've built yourself over time, they kind of like fall into your style, I guess, or sort of learn from you. And we're seeing that a lot now. So across the different teams. And there are different agents that people use and have built, and we're able to sort of share them and use each other's, and you're kind of seeing the difference between them. So I guess it's, as much as it is a time saver and it takes a lot off your plate, you'd have to use them properly. It's not like a black and white.
No, I can imagine. Well, it's like anything, isn't it? Good in, good out. Yeah. But if you're not training them, or there's a level of consistency, and I always talk about this when we talk about prompting. If your colleagues are not using the same formula for prompting and getting the right results, you could all be working on the same campaign but get different results because there's not a sort of a standardized approach.
But completely.
I love what you're doing here. It's really quite profound, isn't it? In the way that you're when you're sharing these findings with your clients, are they which are the things that they're really drilling down on and they're really honing in on? Because you could have a big report and blind them with numbers. But what are you finding they are jumping out at?
Yeah, I mean, traditionally everyone loves like a viral moment, right? Or when things really fly, or when something really pops off, or they see the brand being like demonstrated in a really sort of really nice way that's really in line with their sort of brand core, and that's always really nice. But I think what's really exciting is when we see the insights kind of come to life, and when we kind of, it's quite easy to, like mid-campaign, something really pop off or like something go viral or something, and then really lean into that and like kind of lose sight of the original North Star, let's say. So it's really quite nice when you kind of have that insight, craft it with the sort of brand team or like the client team to something that's really in line with the direction of the wider brand or the messaging or the brand platform, and then to sort of see that come to life. And it doesn't even have to be like massively significant in terms of like reach or numbers, because if you're being, if you're like crafting something quite specific, then as long as you're getting to that specific audience and seeing that engagement, which you've kind of either estimated or predicted or worked hard towards, and seeing it all kind of come together, that's really exciting for them too, because it's, going back to like the original point, like you're seeing where your money's going, right? You said that with that budget, this is what we're aiming to do in terms of an insight, and then seeing that actually happen is a really nice way for us to demonstrate a really good use of spend, right? It's a really good way for us to sort of demonstrate a way of working, of spend, of partnership, of the direction that we're going in. And again, like on a higher level, the original sort of brand platform which we sold into them in the first place really comes to life that way, because that is going a few steps down to actual consumer interaction or sort of wider social engagement. So that's really nice to see that kind of all come and align.
One thing that just on the slide that Janan was sharing a little while ago, I think is quite interesting to see that so often influencer campaigns can be short-lived, and then as soon as they've finished, we've cut off, we've done the report. But we all know that actually great campaigns can keep generating opportunities afterwards. Anything from exactly, so that you get this sort of long-term impact, which is the reason why influencer marketing works best when it's over a longer term, as opposed to these sort of 3-week windows. Would you concur with that?
Yeah, I would. I think it's kind of case by case, right? I mean, if we're heading towards a launch, obviously we need eyeballs for that launch, or if there's like a particular date. My background is also like the beginning of my career, I worked a lot in events, so it was like a ticket sales thing, right, towards that, and then the event itself was a definite, a post that we had to sort of work towards. It was a finite date. But even with that, like after the event, the sentiment that you would see, the brand growth that you would see, would often come like after the report or like on a second year. So yeah, you're absolutely right. Like, and in a more like FMCG world where we're doing like either ongoing long-term activity, it takes a really long time for that really sentiment to really be justified within the data. And it can be like follower growth can explode when when the partnership's announced. Then you see a secondary wave when it's like a product is released, or I don't know, like when these milestones in a campaign. But it does take a long time for like a trickle down effect to happen as well. And I think we're seeing that a lot more reflected in like paid media data as well, right? Because more often than not, I'd say about 80% of like major brands, all of the content they put out is boosted, right? They're not just relying on organic. So we're able to like pull that data from the paid media reports as well to see like when was that reach happening, like when was them engagements coming, and like where was that spend being justified within the performance data. And then seeing that reflected in our influencer reports as well really shows that disparity of like letting things fly for a little bit, like letting it sort of reach where it needs to get to.
So are you saying then that typically when a campaign is finished, you don't produce the report until a couple of weeks after, or 3 weeks after, or is
it really
very
depends,
much...
but I think it kind of depends. I think it's kind of case by case, but we have dashboards as well, right? So you can kind of monitor performance as it's happening, as things go out. But we generally sort of deliver a follow-up report. We'll do like an impact report when something happens, and we do like a follow-up report at the end of the campaign. But we do like keep an eye on the performance, and then we'll follow up, when there's growth after. And I think also working with influencers, they also tap into you to say, look, this is still performing. The ad spend might have stopped, and then like an organic, like it might hit an algorithm again or something, and then come back to life a little bit. We've seen that before as well. So exactly. I think we sort of deliver a report within sort of 2 weeks, but we generally keep an eye on the data, and then do see a rise over time. And also you kind of see that reflected in your follow-up or like next annual campaign or something like that. You'll see like sentiment growth, you'll see like brand awareness grow, or like several other metrics grow. So going into the new campaign, that's when you kind of see that gap, or like you see that progress that you've made from like last year or the previous campaign as well.
Absolutely. Just going back to this again, I mean, do you think these short-term KPIs are actively damaging creator strategy by pulling the creative towards conversion? In other words, we're not leaving enough time for people. And whenever I'm talking to people that have never done influencer marketing before, because they've seen examples of creators blowing up, they think, great, I'm gonna just do one post and one story, and suddenly pennies from heaven or pound notes are going to come flying, because they believe it's going to happen. And I think a lot of that is about managing people's expectations, not so much in the brands that you may all be working with, but certainly for more startup or new brands that have seen the scale of influencer marketing and perhaps haven't allowed enough budget or hadn't allowed enough time for that brand to seed within the influencers audience.
Yeah, I think both can be true. And also we do a lot of expectation management with the bigger brands as well. I think, it's yeah, totally. Yeah. And also there's never enough time and there's never enough money. So you just have to go into it thinking that. But the thing is, like, it's a bit double-edged again, because it does pop off sometimes, like you can have a really good partnership and then, you'll have like a viral moment and you'll see that connection point, and it's like, you can't replicate that, you can't like bottle that. So that does sort of justify that significant shift. But on the other side of that as well, it's like, if you are like a smaller brand with a limited budget, you just have to be smarter with it, and just like, putting those kind of KPIs in at the beginning sometimes is a bit short-sighted. You're right. I think if you've got like a limited budget, maybe think more strategically about the best way to use that with like a marketing mix or like MMM approach or something like this. Just like, how integrated is the social assets and the messaging within that, where's that informing the influencer approach, and does the actual profiles that you're selecting fit into that? Where's the partnership? Where's their tone of voice within it? Where's the brand? Does it overlap? Does it make sense? Like this, you have to think a lot more strategically when the budgets are smaller, and it's just oftentimes like a lot more harder work with a smaller budget to have like that level of impact, because you have to be so smart with it. But yeah, again, it is a bit of a double-edged one.
Yeah, I mean, actually, do you something that we've often talked about before is whether or not you bring a creator that you are likely to be using into a pitch. The only reason I say that is because sometimes some of the really top creators, they know their numbers inside out, they know what works, and it always bothers me when some brands just use them almost as media amplifiers, when they are actually creative strategists, the best ones in their own right, and perhaps they've got a better handle on whether or not those KPIs have been set are realistic given the budget allocation.
Yeah, for sure. I think, the question, would I take an influencer for a pitch? Probably not. But I think when we prepare a response to a pitch, we certainly put profiles within that to sort of demonstrate our thinking, and the metrics that we use to justify that are just as important as the sort of the personality or the content production style or the audience metrics. It all has to sort of make up, to sort of tell the story, sell in the story that we're kind of pitching to them. But you're right that like it's the creator industry or the creator economy is becoming really fully developed. It's not something that's brand new. People, are taking it really seriously. It's their whole careers, and they are a resource within that. And yeah, they totally know what they're doing. And, they're attached to massive infrastructures of agencies and managers and everything else, and us, everyone in this room, that work on that as well. So I think, you can't, facts don't care about your feelings a lot of the time. And, we can pull the data to demonstrate exactly what kind of engagement you're getting or what you've got, or your sentiment, or it's all there for us to see. So I think it's up to everybody to sort of be smart about that.
Okay, I mean, just on KPIs again, I mean, if we had 3 to choose which were essential, that you might emphasize that perhaps you may not have done 3 years ago, what would you say those were?
Oh, I don't know. I think it's maybe just my interpretation or weighting of traditional KPIs as well, right? So reach is always incredibly important, right? And I think engagement has always been there, but we are putting it front and center now. I think we can all agree, but I just think the way that we're using that, and I think on another level of that, like sentiment as well, because, engagement isn't necessarily constructive for a brand. Or constructive for a partnership or constructive for a campaign. So I think that the way that we're using that and how one informs another, rather than having, working independently where it's got good reach but bad engagement, or it's got good reach but terrible sentiment, or, it's like it needs to, that flow line has to, or the narrative has to be clear between them, and also ladder back up to the original sort of strategic direction that we were planning to take in the first place, So I think it's rather than, the point we were making earlier about like originally reporting was just like big numbers on a page, right? We've hit this many people. It's like we're looking at it a lot more deeper than that now. So I think rather than a whole new set of KPIs, I'm just like taking KPIs or looking at the KPIs in a kind of a different way, or like taking the meaning from those numbers a bit deeper.
Yeah, absolutely. And then what sort of KPIs are you using that are perhaps, or measurement rather, should I say, what indicators are for future return? In other words, attention proxies, ad recall lift, that sort of thing, brand search lift, particularly if we now look at the change in ChatGPT being a search tool, share of voice or something else. What are the sorts of things that
I think recognition as well, like going back to that example we were talking about earlier about Sennheiser, right? So Sennheiser is a brand that's been around forever, but talking to an entirely new audience or like totally new demographic was really important for us to segment that audience to see what impact we were having, particularly on that age demographic, right? And a key part of that is just general recognition. Like, do they know what this brand is? Because it's a multifaceted brand. They make really amazing speakers and headphones, but they also make like hearing aids and they're like audio care and things like this, right? So it's being able to demonstrate that the audience which we've targeted, A, recognize that brand, B, kind of know what it does, and C, kind of see themselves within that brand world, right? So if it's an entry-level product, like in this case, we don't need them to know the whole product line. We don't need them to know that they have, that they take their approach to audio incredibly seriously and get that really deep into it. It's like, do they recognize what this brand is? Can we push that further? Is this campaign going to fuel that? So I think recognition in that case is something that I never really previously had taken so seriously.
Great, amazing. Well, look, thank you for that, Jack. That's really insightful. I know, Janan, you're going to share with us some new measurement models that are reshaping influencer marketing over the last 3 years. So do you want to just take us through that? And any other questions that might have popped into the chat?
We have a little bit of a technical issue on LinkedIn, and it seems like there's a bit of a gap between our software with Stream and LinkedIn. So actually our audio and visual is not really in sync, which is obviously making it a little bit difficult for people to follow this session. Unfortunately, is not something that we can do anything about. But anyways, it's the first time we do this, and I think we can pull up the slides where people can actually. We just made a little slide, Sebastian, if you can share that, where people can actually join the community and ask us questions in there. That would be awesome. Unfortunately, we have a little bit of a gap there, Gordon. So I'm not sure if we should try to round up here, or what you would like to do.
Yeah, okay, that's a shame. Apologies for those people that are watching that, but you'll be able to see this in the community afterwards. But honestly, Jack, it's been wonderful to have you sharing your thoughts and ideas around this. Hugely valuable, and I know you'll be a great asset to our community.
No worries, anytime. Thank you for having me. It's always a